This is actually generation number 4 of a modified stock car. Well, through the years and through the generations, they certainly have changed. They no longer resemble stock cars. This 4th generation in this particular type of racing has become a sprint car. And this is a fairly typical sprint car. It's lean, it's tall, it's brutish, and it has this huge airfoil on the top. Now, this car, having been a typical race car, is in marked contrast once you get close to the new 1981 World of Outlaw, in this case, sprint car. Now look at this. This is an example of a partial Venturi effect, something that we actually saw for the first time at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in Jim Hall Chaparral cars. What this device here is, it's like a wind tunnel. The wind gushes out from underneath the race car, creating a partial vacuum underneath this tunnel, so to speak, and help pressing the car down on the ground. Part of the new aerodynamics that is on some of the more technologically advanced sprint cars here at Syracuse this weekend. Here, of course, is the tail. The fuel cell is in here. And look at the wing now, the airfoil on top of these cars. They first appeared in super modified or sprint car racing back in the mid-60s, before they were on the Indianapolis cars, as a matter of fact. Now look at the difference in this wing. First of all, the uprights are at different heights. Now, the reason for this upright being higher and this upright being lower is that when these cars go into the corners, they are actually fighting not only the wind coming toward the front of the car, but also the crosswinds, because the car goes into the turns on an angle. And by having these uprights at different heights, they are getting the maximum surface facing the wind as they go into the corners pitched on an angle. You also notice that this wing is offset to the left. Most of the weight on this car, because of the wing, is pressing down on the left-hand side of the car, giving it a better bite in the corners. Now let's talk about bite. The primary reason for the bite after the aerodynamics take effect are the tires, and this is a major part of the story of the 1980s of sprint cars. And here's Carter Alsop with a report.
I'm here with Doug Wolfgang. Doug, at Knoxville, you nearly missed the race putting a bead lock on your wheel. Will you tell us about why you did that?
Well, I felt that it was imperative to have a bead lock in for traction there, although they were designed by Hoosier Tire Company in Indiana to hold the tires more firmly on the wheel, just like in NASCAR they use them, you know, to hold the tires on the wheel in case they have a flat. They don't go all the way down to the wheel and cause a crash. But there at Knoxville, they had a 15-pound air rule, and obviously 15 pounds will hold your tire on the wheel. But it felt to me like with a liner in it, the tire gave more traction. I feel the same way here, so I felt it was imperative I have it in there.
And what was your method when you put the bead lock on there? You had 15 pounds of pressure in the bead lock, and then the tire itself?
Well, the bead lock is just a device inside the tire. It's like another tire in the tire, and it's got an inner tube between the rim and the bead lock, and you just put air in that inner tube, about 50 pounds, to press the bead lock out against the wheel or the tire, and then the tire gets pressed out against the wheel. And then the valve core is a two-way valve core. You can read the air pressure inside the inner tube, and also on the outside of the bead lock, which is airless between the bead lock and the tire. So there we had to run 15 pounds between the tire and the bead lock, and I usually run 40 to 55 pounds holding the bead lock against the tire.
What other effects did you find? You said you used it partially for traction, and what did you find when you got on the track?
Well, I felt that with 15-pound air rule, if you just used a regular inner tube in them, the tire crowned up a little bit, and you were actually running on say 2/3 of the surface of the tire. Whereas when we blowed the tire up with an inner liner in it, it held it up against the wheel tight, and yet being tubeless on the outside, it spaced the air out evenly and kept the tire pretty flat at 15 pounds. So it was definitely a traction advantage there.
That's great. Doug, thank you very much. Larry?
Laboratory technology in tires and aerodynamics, the sprint car of 1981. By the way, that big wing that we saw on top of the car earlier has been increased by about 30% this year. The wing can cover up to 25 square feet, that is. And the wings on the front of the cars, they're also a little bigger this year. Last year they could only be 5 square feet, this year 6. And look at the difference in configuration that some of the teams have approached this race with this weekend. This wing here on Smokey Snellbaker's car is very reminiscent reminiscent of the wings that are on Indianapolis cars. And matter of fact, the nose piece on this car almost looks like the Mallard of Jim Hurtubise fame from Indianapolis about 10 years ago. The car over there to your right, as you can see, the airfoil has been extended to the point where it is above the front wheels. Their intention there is to drive the force of the air colliding with that airfoil right down on top of the front axle. The intention here to create a flow over the front wheels, over the hood, and eventually over the top of the car. Well, when modified stock car racing, and then modified racing, and then super modified racing, and then super sprint car racing was coming along through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, who would have thought that would have come to this eventually, that aerodynamics would actually be an important part of the story on a dirt racetrack?
Which technology works best? We'll find out when we bring you the Syracuse Super National Finals. Welcome back to the New York State Fairgrounds in Syracuse, New York. Beautiful fall foliage and beautiful racing weekend here for the Syracuse Super Nationals for sprint cars. We'll take a look at some of the qualifying that was taped earlier and give you an idea of just how tough it is to get around this 1-mile super speedway on dirt. This is a track that presents its very own unique and special challenges to the sprint car driver. The first car we'll see is car number 63, Jack Haudenschaub of Millersburg, Ohio, driving the Bob Hampshire B&B Automotive Sprinter. It's a Tignati chassis with a small block Chevy engine.
Well, you saw Jack, as he went around the first turn, actually get high. Now, the groove on this 1-mile racetrack is down on the bottom, as close to that inside rail as you possibly can get through the turns, and of course drifting high, coming out of the turns, going down both the front and the back stretch. Haudenschaub's car was pushing, as the racers calling, having a tendency to go to the right when he wanted to turn left through the first and second turns, but there you see him through turns 3 and 4, just like the textbook would indicate.
Each time that car wigs and wags, it gets just a little bit out of shape and costs time. Look at the car want to go straight as it goes into the turn. That's the push that Larry discusses, and he gets that car loose coming off the corner. Better exit than entrance.
Mike, you know, it's funny. It seems as though there are only 2 types of sprint car drivers. You're either an old veteran or you're a young rookie. They never talk about the people in between, and once you've been around for a couple of years, you become an old veteran. Haudenschaub is one of those young people.
We're watching Paul Klein of Wrightsville, Pennsylvania, driving the K&K Dodge-sponsored Stanton sprint car with a 406 cubic inch engine.
Well, Klein is one of the East Coast drivers. There's an organization known as the United Racing Club, URC, that campaigns on a regular basis, and Klein runs in the vicinity where the URC people compete. He is also a regular in eastern Pennsylvania in the Williams Grove area. Now, Klein, as you can see, turning in a lap at 33.56. Now, that's a marginal time. He may not get into the field with a lap in the 33.5 seconds.
They will only take the fastest 30 qualifiers directly into the feature event, and everyone else will have to go and run the B main event. Klein sets up for the corner and comes through. Note that the wings on his car are offset. Wing science is still pretty much a black art in sprint car racing, and everybody has an individual interpretation.
Incidentally, Haudenschaub, who was the first qualifier we looked at, did time in at 32.7 seconds. That's rounded off, and that figures to be up into the field.
Steve Smith of New Oxford, Pennsylvania, guaranteed starter in the Fletcher Amoco machine. He designed the chassis himself, and he has 380 cubic inches of small block power.
Steve Smith victored the last significant open competition sprint car race here in the East Coast about a month ago when he won for the 3rd time the Williams. And look at Smith at 30.177. That certainly figures to be well up in the top 10 and definitely a threat for the pole, Mike.
That is the fastest time so far. Look at, there's an air splitter on the nose of that car, much like the nose of a boat, directs the air to either side rather than the conventional up-mounted wing. So everyone with their own thoughts on aerodynamic technology, and Smith's time the fastest of the day so far when he made his run.
Well, Smith, in addition to winning the Williams Grove race about a month ago, also won just a week ago at the Atomic Speedway in southern Ohio, Chillicothe, Ohio. Won over $7,000 for that particular racetrack's biggest race of the year. And of course, if you follow sprint cars, you know that the name Steve Smith is synonymous with success and victories at the Lincoln Speedway in Hanover, Pennsylvania.
Crowd getting a look at the action as Steve Smith completes his qualifying run, and onto the speedway comes Kenny Jacobs of Holmesville, Ohio, the Frank Crash Auto Wrecking Shore chassis, 390 cubic inches.
Well, about 3 years ago, 4 names exploded onto the scene of open competition sprint car racing. One of the names was Kenny Jacobs. Another name was Brad Doty, and the other 2 names were the Haudenschild brothers. Now, they hail from an area near Worcester, Ohio, about midway between Columbus and Cleveland, Ohio, in the central part of northern Ohio. And these guys, running small blocks for quite a number of years, all of a sudden 3 years ago decided they wanted to go Major League sprint car racing. And my goodness, had the 4 of them made a splash. Jacobs was 3rd in that Williams Grove National a month ago.
Kenny Jacobs' time of 31.520 seconds on the mile at Syracuse puts him into the top 10 for now. Good strong run, and again another approach to aerodynamics. A low, way out front mounted wing on the front of that car, the side plates to catch the air in the corner and prevent that car from wanting to tip over and give you more side bite in the turn. Checkered flag, Kenny Jacobs, good strong run. He finished 32nd here last year, had rear end problems and hopes to improve. Jim Champagne of Clay, New York in the 8 ball has won everything there is to win about 1 hour from Syracuse on the tough 5/8 mile asphalt at Oswego, New York. And having climbed that mountain, he's come sprint car racing.
Well, Mike, I'll tell you, in all my years of following automobile racing, I have perhaps as much respect for this guy. There you see him in at 32.2 seconds. That should be in the field, but difficult to tell exactly where right now. I have as much respect for him, I think, as I do for anybody. He was so successful on the pavement, and about 4 or 5 years ago he said, you know, I've done everything I possibly can do on a paved racetrack and an ultra super modified. I think I want to go dirt track. And then has he been successful? Well, he was 3rd at this race a year ago, one of certainly the most prestigious and important dirt track races of the year.
Jim Champagne in the 8 ball sprint car, a much more conventional machine than the super modifieds. He drives on pavement. He devised a car for Oswego that was so controversial and so quick, a rear engine car, that the minute he showed up to the track, the car was banned from competition.
Not only a rear engine, but the car had almost a mid-engine configuration, and there were a lot of other tricks on it that I don't think even really came all the way out, Mike.
Jim Champagne of Clay, New York, completing his run in the 8 ball sprinter. As qualifying continues here at the Syracuse Super Nationals. Next car up will be car number 81, Lee Osborne of Jamestown, Indiana. The Wizard of Oz, and always a threat.
The Wizard of Oz, another one of his nicknames is the Jamestown Smithy Shop, or the Jamestown Blacksmith, I guess you might call it. Lee Osborne, a lot of people forget, actually started his career on pavement in Eastern Modifieds in the Northeast. He then made the transition to the open-wheeled Super Modifieds, or rather the Super Sprint cars of Eastern Pennsylvania. Even took a twirl at the USAC Sprint Car Division, where he